All right, I'm going to go through this experiment proposal sample, highlight some things, and talk about as many problems I can find line by line. So the research question is going to be okay. We'll just assume that's what they're trying to test, and any issues that come up are going to be issues in the other sections. So does the design reflect the research question? That'll be the same for next week. So the first one, the study will include 6 English learning toddlers between 12 and 26 months of age. If we take a look back at the research question, this is for 18 months. This gap is way too wide for 12 and 26 months, especially with children. If you're looking for like 20-year-old adults and you say 19 to 21 years, that's fine. But with kids, this is not great. The most we'd want to go is like 16 to 20 months, but 17 to 19 would be better. The closer we can get to that 18-month mark, the better. Furthermore, if we could get like 15 plus people participating, that would be great. Recruiting more in case people drop out is always great. But 15 is roughly the minimum we should be aiming for with like an appropriate amount of funding from a university. Okay, this age range is appropriate because children in this period are learning many new words and may be sensitive to patterns in speech. We could comment on that, but I think the first things we pointed out are important enough that we can ignore that. Children will be recruited from a local database of families who have previously expressed interest in participating. This is fine. Uh, it's still going to be a representative sample. Um, it's just that these are parents who are basically more committed, so you're less likely to have people dropping out, and you can get your participant pool faster. To be included, children must have at least 50% English exposure according to the caregiver report and no known hearing concerns. 50% for an English learning toddler. At this point, you're entering probably bilingual territory, and bilingual children will behave differently. So if we can bump this up to at least like 80% plus, that'd be great. Maybe 70%, but we need like a vast majority of this to be English exposure if we want to test English exposed infants. Children with reported developmental delays will not be excluded if the caregiver believes the child can complete the task. Okay, if we have developmental delays, this means that if we're testing 18-month-olds, they might not be at that stage yet. They might still be behaving as a child with 6 months of development, 10 months. So this is not ideal. And we're also saying if the caregiver believes the child can complete the task. Okay, the caregiver should not be determining whether or not the child is eligible for the experiment. That should be the researcher's job. So the researcher should have some sort of test beforehand if a parent is unsure if the child can participate in order to check whether or not they pass criteria. Caregivers will complete the MacArthur Bates Communicative Development Inventory test, so CDI, but they'll only be used descriptively and will not in fact affect inclusion. This is okay. We don't know what this is yet, but this is basically a test that checks how many words a child roughly knows. So if you're looking at novel word learning, you might want to know this information because if a child knows many new words compared to a child that doesn't know many words, they might behave differently on the test. But that's why it's being used descriptively and not affecting inclusion. Okay. Approximately 2 additional toddlers will be recruited to account for potential data loss due to fussiness, failure to complete the task, or inattentiveness. This should be higher, just like with the 6 English learning toddlers. At this point, if you're only recruiting 6 and saying, I want 2 more, you've already missed the mark there. So there should be many more children. Okay, children must complete at least 4 of the 12 test trials to be included. This is too little. If we could get 8 plus, that would be ideal, but less than half. In fact, this is a third at this point. This is a little bit too low to be included. There may be certain experiments where you're testing like a very specific population of children where 4 out of 12 would at least give some information and be useful. But considering these are just 18-month-old English learning infants, we can have higher criteria for this. Okay, if a child becomes distracted, the experimenter may decide whether the session still contains enough useful data. Again, this goes back to the test trials. I think this last line is reasonable. You see this sometimes with adult studies too, where you'll get data from a participant. They seem like everything is fine during the task, but then you take a look at their results and they're not like Outliers, it's very clear that something else has gone wrong, or they are treating the experiment not in an appropriate way. So the last one I think is okay. Okay, task and design. The study will use a head turn listening preference task. In class, we mentioned that maybe a different task could be used at this stage. I think with 18-month-olds, this is still okay, but there might be better choices for this. Especially because at this age, they can probably point and gesture without any issues. But for a sound stimuli task, I think this is fine. So subjective criticism here, but nothing I would say is majorly wrong with this. Toddlers will sit in a quiet testing room and hear short sentences containing novel words with different stress patterns. Okay, the IV is the stress pattern. It's either strong, weak, or weak, strong. Kind of variable is listening time, measured as how long the toddler continues facing the sound source after the sentence begins. We do see some questionable task design here, not so much in what they're doing, but how they're measuring it. So if the new word starts within a sentence, then it shouldn't be after the sentence begins, but after the new word begins, after the trochaic or iambic word. So that's a little weird. If we change that, I think it's okay. The next one, the study will use within subject design. So each toddler will hear both stress conditions. This is good. We want children to be hearing both so we can test differences. The stimuli will include two novel disyllabic words, doba and kafar. Okay, this is a little problematic because we're talking about word learning and stress, but we're just giving one example of each. So just two words. And if we go further, we see that it's doba only in trochaic and kafar only in iambic. So this is not enough. We need some more variation in our words, especially if we're testing stress. Because you can think about this as a compound. Maybe they're not learning stress patterns, they're just reacting to the first sound they hear, like a duh or a k, or maybe a syllable that ends with a vowel and a syllable that ends with a consonant, kafar versus doba, right? So we want more variation. We also want some of the dobas to be iambic and some of the kafars to be trochaic. In other words, we want both in each condition. We want doba and doba. We want kefar and kafar. Okay. Trial order will be pseudo-randomized, although most trochaic trials will appear in the first half and most iambic in the second half. So in other words, the experimenter is somewhat manipulating the order that they're coming in, and the issue here is that we might have a trial effect. So the fact that they're hearing a bunch of ones in one condition in the beginning and the rest in the second half, that could be problematic. We want more randomization, so that way it's not just like a learned task. You can imagine, okay, if one condition they don't respond to, like trochaic, they might just learn not to turn their head in the first half. And then in the second half, they're starting to turn their head, so they're just realizing, oh, with all of these words, I need to continue turning my head. That would not be great. The auditory stimuli will be recorded by two native speakers of English. This is not problematic on its own if they have very similar qualities, or if you're testing differences between speakers to see if it's just a speaker that a child is picking up on or multiple. The problem comes with one speaker will record all trochaic items and a different for all iambic items. This is problematic because they could just be responding to the speaker and not to the difference in stress. Recordings will be adjusted so that the sentences sound natural. That's great, but they will not be matched for pitch, duration, speaking rate, or intensity. So these things link together. If they could somehow do a match, maybe this is a little bit better, but still, we would want both speakers recording both items. If we keep going on, the trochaic words will appear in noun-like frames, while the iambic will appear in action-like frames. So this is also problematic because we just have a different category here. Our dobas are nouns and our kafars are verbs. So we're basically not only changing stress, we're changing the speaker and we're changing the type of word that they are. And if these are English-speaking infants, now we know that they're going to respond to nouns more than they respond to verbs. Okay. They learn more nouns than verbs, especially at this age at 18 months. If we go back to our list, that 11th to 19th month frame, The majority are still nouns. Okay. A trained coder will observe the toddler through a monitor and record whether the child remains oriented toward the blinking light and sound source. The coder will know which condition is being presented so they can code efficiently. A second coder will review a subset of sessions only if the first coder is unsure about the trial. So we won't really go into this. It's more of a research methods course thing, but they should not know which condition it is because they might be biased in their coding. So sometimes coders like to be a little bit more generous if they know what the trial is and they know what types of results they're trying to get. So when a researcher is recording results, they should also be as blind as possible, that's the term for it, to the conditions that the participant is currently experiencing. If you can get a computer coding things, that's even better because we take humans out of it. Okay, so sample experimental items. Table 1 illustrates example experimental items. Great. Archaic words are noun-like, iambic and action-like. Okay, so the same thing has been said again. The same side light may be used across several trials to make the task easier for toddlers to follow. This is problematic because we see that in the trochaic, it's always a blinking left light, and in the iambic, it's always a blinking right light. Okay, this isn't good because maybe now they're not responding to the words, they're just responding to the visual cues. And why are we trying to make it easier for children to follow? What are they following? They're just hearing words and responding with head turns. So they don't need to follow anything. They just need to listen and turn their head. So I think the lights are fine. But if you're doing this, we should at least randomize it so some of the trochaics are left and some trochaics are right, and then some iambics are left and some iambics are right. So in other words, the blinking light is not giving away which trial or condition you're on. Moving on to the procedure. Caregivers will provide informed consent. That's fantastic. Toddler will sit on the lap approximately 60 centimeters from the center of the testing booth. That's also fine. Caregivers will remain with the toddler throughout the session and may help keep the child seated. That's good. We don't want children falling off a seat that is 2 feet above the ground. The caregiver will be asked not to influence the responses, but they will not wear headphones. So this is no good. We need them to wear headphones because, again, when you know what's happening with your child, you may subconsciously respond with body movements, with taps. If you're holding onto a child, you may squeeze them a little bit harder, just unintentionally wanting them to respond properly to the trial. So we don't want the caregiver to hear anything if they're with the child. Okay, the session will begin with 2 familiarization trials. That's fine. More would be better, but if you're just establishing like a normal gaze, I think two could be okay. Let's put this under subjective here. More familiarization is better with younger kids. Each trial will begin with a small light. Clicking on one side, when the toddler turns toward the light, the auditory stimulus sentence will begin. Great. Sentence will continue until the toddler looks away for more than 2 seconds or until the maximum trial length is reached. Yeah, this is all right. One thing here, and this is an interpretive difference now that I think about this. Until the toddler looks away for 2 seconds or until the maximum length is reached, we still don't necessarily know what they're doing when they look away from the light for more than 2 seconds. This would make more sense if we had something in the middle to get their attention first, and then we tracked the turn away from the light when that word happens. Especially if the light is on one side of the room, like left or right. As soon as the child puts their gaze to the center, it may be close to leaving their periphery. If they look all the way to the right, they don't have that light to really get them back. So a center light would be better here if this is what we're doing for the procedure. Test phase will include 12 trials, 2 words, 2 stress conditions, and 3 repetitions. So we are repeating conditions here. If we have 6 example trials, for example, we have our 2 words and 2 stress, which is basically 1 word per stress, and then 3 repetitions each. We're really only totaling 6 different trials. is expressed in the sample items as well, which means that every child is hearing the same trial twice. This is not always a bad thing, but because we only have two different words, it'd be better just to have 12 trials with different word sets as well. Like, this is not a situation where we need to do repetition because there are many other test items we could use instead of repeating ones that we've already had. Okay. Next sentence is fine. Listening time will be recorded from the onset of the sentence until the child turns away from the sound source. Again, these words are not at the beginning. They're like either in the middle of the sentence or close to the end of the sentence. So if they're being recorded from the onset of the sentence, that doesn't. What does this really tell us? We don't know how long each sentence is. The sentences could vary in length. So maybe before they have to turn in this condition, it's like 2 seconds. Maybe in this one, it's like 2.5 seconds. And if you get enough data points with 2 and 2.5, we might not be able to analyze this the best that we could. So starting from the onset of the word, like mentioned before, would be better because at least then it's saying, okay, when the word starts and you turn away, you're taking a look at the turning away time. That would give us more information. Like, we don't care about the listening time for the sentence parts that are good. Okay. More repetition of bad stuff in the last line there. An attention getting light will appear between trials to bring the attentions back to the center. Okay, so there is a middle light there. That could have been written a little bit earlier. I won't highlight it, but that would have been nice. So now we have 3 lights in our trials, a middle one, a left one, and a right one. If the toddler becomes upset, the session will pause briefly and then resume from the next trial. Okay, that's fine. So if it's upset, we're not going back to something we've already heard. We're just going to go to the next one. Sessions with fewer than 4 completed trials will be retained if the remaining trials appear clear enough to interpret. We just said earlier that we needed 4 plus, and now we're saying, actually, if there's less than 4 that are good, maybe we can keep them. So we're contradicting ourselves in our proposal, which is not good. If you submitted this in an ethics proposal and contradicted yourself, like it would come with a very angry and confused comment. So not good there. Don't contradict yourself. Be consistent. If they're going to be bad, they should be at least consistently bad. Okay. With inferences, the predicted result is that toddlers will listen longer to passages in which trochaic words occur in noun-like frames and iambic words occur in action-like frames. Okay, the pattern would suggest that toddlers may be sensitive to a relationship between prosodic stress and sentence context. Okay, let's just look at this first sentence again. We'll listen longer to passages where trochaic words occur in noun-like frames and iambic words occur in action-like frames. But those are the only conditions you're giving the child. So, of course, it's predicted. That's the only possible prediction that you could have because you're saying they're going to listen longer to all the passages. Okay, so this is not great. It doesn't tell us anything. You're basically saying, okay, the experiment exists. We get the results that, of course, we're going to get. And then that's it. If we wanted to be better with this prediction, we'd have to talk about a difference between them. We shouldn't be using the and words here. We should be comparing the two conditions, not just saying they look longer in both. Okay. A null result would occur if there's no reliable distance in listening times between conditions. You're basically just repeating the same thing here based on the writing. So you're basically saying the same thing. If they're both the same, that's great. If they're both the same, then that's not great. Okay, not great. An alternative pattern would occur if toddlers show an overall preference for one speaker, one word, one side of the testing booth, or one side of one sentence type, regardless of stress pattern. Okay, this is actually somewhat okay, but the problem is we're including all of these different confounds because what we're supposed to be testing is stress pattern. So it's like they finally understand the types of differences they should be searching for, but they're not putting it into the right context. And then this bit, like general attention to the auditory or visual setup. Yeah, okay. So they can't really separate these things because they're bundling them all together. One speaker is saying one word, and the light is always on one side of the testing booth, always in the same sentence frame, and the stress is the same. So it's not an or here, and it's not regardless of stress pattern. These are all the same thing. So these inferences really don't tell us anything. They haven't given us any good data. It seems like from this, they don't really understand their experiment either, or at least they've written it in a way with and such that it's not clear to the people reading this that they understand what they're testing. Okay. This was for me painful to write. It's not too often I get to write something that just doesn't make sense, but there we go. There's a lot of issues there. So if we go through all the questions here, I'm just going to take a look and make sure that we've talked about everything here. So we have talked about question 1, which is we need a tighter age range. It clearly identifies the participant group Q being studied and outcome. Is the research question written well or poorly? Yes, this is fine. The question is well, this is fine. The rest is not. The inclusion criteria require children to have at least 50% English exposure. No, we would want it higher. Children may be included in the final analysis after completing only 4 of 12 test trials. We need more. More would be better. The study uses a nonverbal task, so toddlers do not need to explain their answer or produce speech. Is this task appropriate for the age group? It could be. I think for this one, it's fine. There might be better ones with pointing, so not speech production, but just some sort of task. Even if it's like picking out an object, or as we learned with the principles, somehow doing a motion to indicate an action. But I think the head turn is totally fine here. Is the task appropriate for the research question? Yes. So for 6, this is fine. For stress patterns, the only issue here is that the way that the task is designed. So that needs to be fixed. But the task itself is okay if we make changes. So the novel word doba is always with trochaic, kafar always with iambic. This is bad. We don't want this. We talked about this. The frames is also bad. It's a confound. The ordering is bad. This should be randomized. And the proposal, okay, is it useful for the proposal to acknowledge these possible explanations? The answer is yes. It is very useful because it's saying that the researchers have an idea of how they're going to interpret their results. The only issue is that the explanations and preferences that they included aren't really great. So that they don't understand that there's already confounds and that these are already issues, but it is useful for them to acknowledge it. Okay, so that's the general gist of this, going line by line to see what the issues are. Of course, in class, it will be shorter, so it'll only be 2 pages, 1.5 pages double-spaced. And the questions will be more general. So this asks about very specific things. Instead, the questions will be like, is the inclusion criteria handled well or poorly? If poorly, how to fix? Is the exclusion criteria? Is the task designed well? Is the trial order fine? So instead of giving very specific points to look at, it's just talking about like a general aspect of it. And then you'll be able to analyze the 2 or 3 sentences there to say whether it's good or not. So the specific questions I give you will be released Monday or Tuesday. And the experiment that you get will be either very similar to this or very similar to the production studies, not production, the perception studies that we've seen in the 2nd week of lecture. So Gento has office hours Monday. I do Tuesday, Thursday. Questions over email, Discord, they're all fine.